With training camp just over a month away, we're going to talk about 3 players for the Saints that need to step up this upcoming season. And we'll also talk about 3 players the Saints should consider signing before they start training camp on the 22nd of July. We'll talk about that right here on the Straight Up Saints podcast.
You're listening to the Straight Up Saints podcast.
What is up, Who Dat Nation? Welcome inside another edition of the Straight Up Saints podcast. I'm your host, Chris Rosvoglu, and as always, the Straight Up Saints podcast is brought to you by Scott McNair Injury Lawyers. You've been injured in any kind of accident, car, truck, 18-wheeler, or hurt offshore, Scott McNair handles it all. You give him a call at 504-500-1111 for a free consultation. They'll always fight for the win. What is going on, everyone, on this Wednesday? What is it, June 18th? So, hope everyone's having a good time. I know we're kind of in a dead period for the New Orleans Saints right now as we get closer to training camp and what the Saints could potentially do. But I think, look, I've said throughout the last couple of months, I've felt pretty optimistic about this team, not record-wise, more so the vibe that Kellen Moore's building for this team. I feel really good about it. I think structurally the roster, while they lack depth, I don't think it has as many glaring holes as the national media may say, because everyone around the league is pretty much penned the Saints as the worst team in the league. That said, they do have some, roster deficiencies, and maybe they could kind of supplement that with signings as they get closer to camp. So I'm going to mention towards the end, as we get to the second half, and obviously pull up any comments that you guys may have in the chat. So as always, if you have them, drop them, and I'll get to you in just a little bit. I'm going to talk about 3 players they should sign, but also 3 players that I believe need to step up. So let's start off with the first one, and that is the 3 players need to step up for the Saints. Now, I'm going to stray away from the big names, right? And the reason I'm going to do that is, yeah, it's easy to sit here or logical to say, hey, Alvin Kamara's got to be great this year for the Saints to be good. But that's the case almost every year, right? Same goes for Eric McCoy. He's got to be healthy. He's got to be great. Chris Olave's got to be healthy. He's got to be great. I want to go away from that and go towards players who, deep down, I do believe they're capable of making a difference for the Saints. We just haven't seen them either do it yet or haven't seen them do it on a consistent basis. So without further ado, let's get into the first option. I'm going to talk about a guy who I mentioned, I believe, last Wednesday when we had our last edition of the Straight Up Saints podcast, Kool-Aid McKinstry. That is not the number one guy, but one of 3 that I'll mention that I believe needs to step up. So let's get into the logistics of it. I think Kool-Aid McKinstry, again, top 45 pick from last year. The Saints traded up to get him. I believe that he can be a difference maker for the Saints defense. And I'd go as far to say if he is a difference maker for the Saints defense, everything feels different about them, right? You feel like you can be a little bit more versatile with Alontae Taylor. You feel like the secondary has a little bit more impact to them, a little bit more juice to them. In addition, not just because of Alontae, but also because of Justin Reed, who they brought in through free agency. And again, with Kool-Aid, I think we've seen traits in the limited time he had last year. It didn't look like he was the loss. It was just one of those where, all right, we didn't get to see him on full display. Part of that was in the beginning of the year, Saints had a lot of depth with guys like Paulson Adebo, guys like Marshawn Lattimore. And then in terms of Kool-Aid, he's not the type of interception machine, but he does have great instincts. And we've seen them so far, especially collegiately. But during his rookie year, I think you saw enough of it. And he did take those strides in minicamp for the Saints. And again, it's just minicamp, but I'd say the arrow is trending up. And I do believe if that arrow continues to trend up, then the Saints defense looks different. And I think more importantly, you feel like you have one boundary corner for the 2025 season and beyond that you can feel good about. And why I say only one, Alontae Taylor, he's got a contract situation that the Saints eventually are going to have to figure out. At least for Kool-Aid, you have him under contract for the next couple of years. So I feel like Kool-Aid is talented enough, and he plays a position that is super important for the Saints right now, where we don't know what that cornerback room is going to shape out to be, where I'm going to put him in my 3 for players that need to step up. The next guy that I believe needs to step up, and I don't know if it's going to happen because unlike Kool-Aid, there's a bigger sample size here. Kool-Aid McKinstry, we just know he was a dog at Alabama, and we haven't seen enough of him at the pro level to feel like, hey, we could stamp him as a true starter. We're just hoping he could take it. This guy, I think some days look good and some days I don't know what to expect from him, and we need to get some consistency as Saints fans to feel good about him. Jawan Johnson. Look, the Saints made a hefty offer to Jawan Johnson. He was a player where I thought and kind of assumed he wasn't going to be back. I really didn't think they were going to bring him back. And yet they signed him to a 3-year, $30+ million deal, and he had other suitors. There were other teams out there that wanted Jawan Johnson, as I reposition myself. Jawan Johnson loved the idea of playing in Kellen Moore's offense. He loved the pitch that was kind of thrown his way. And maybe this is the scheme, the coaching staff that is going to value Jawan Johnson differently. And if that's the case, that'd be great for the Saints, because as much as I love Olave, as much as I love Shaheed, the Saints need a third pass catcher, and more importantly, need a third pass catcher that's going to do a lot of work over the middle of the field. I think Olave and Shaheed can absolutely expose defenses vertically, and they are really good playmakers. But you need another guy to kind of take over. And what I'll say about Jawan Johnson, and the reason why I can't convince myself that he'll be consistent, but I also can trick myself at the same time, is there's this inconsistency and there's moments where he does look good. If I just take the last 2 games of this past season, and when I was looking through the numbers and his splits, I couldn't believe it. So Jawan Johnson had 548 receiving yards last year, 548. 144 of those came in the last 2 games of the season. So, yeah, you want to tell me garbage time, whatever. I mean, they're playing the Bucs, who were playing for something. Like, it's not like they were playing scrubs. Like the Saints were playing important teams that were actually vying for positioning where they had nothing to play for. So 144 in 2 games, in my opinion, is fantastic. Here's the downside. Beginning of the year, Jawan Johnson starts pretty damn slow. Only 39 yards receiving in the month of September last season, and then 145 in October. So when you put that all together, guys, that's, 184? When you have 184 yards in the first 2 months of the season, and then in the last 2 games of the season, you have 144, those inconsistencies, there needs to be a little bit more balance. I'd rather get 50 yards a game from Jawan Johnson than get 90 yards in one and then get 10 to 15 in the other. I think that inconsistency is a detriment. So I believe the Saints value Jawan Johnson. I mean, hell, you wouldn't give him a 3-year, $30 million contract if you didn't. But can he be consistent? I'm not saying can his numbers break through. I think, like I said, Jawan was a 548-yard receiving tight end last year. He'll probably get close to 550, 600, whatever it be. Let's put him at 600, let's say, and that would be a great year for Jawan. Can it be a consistent season, though? Consistent. Not 50 yards one game, 5 the next. Consistency. Unfortunately, he's been consistently inconsistent, and that's why I'm going to put him on watch here, because it is a weak tight end group. The Saints need another pass catcher to step up, and God damn it, they paid him $30 million. You need to get some value out of that contract if you're the Saints. So that's number 2 for me. The third and final name that I will bring up, and this is the one that I think can make the biggest impact for the Saints, Chase Young. The Saints paid Chase Young, I'd say, a handsome amount of money. I'm not going to say it was crippling money at the contract they gave him. But look, after one season, they felt comfortable giving him a 3-year, $51 million deal. Interestingly enough, the Saints, while I think that deal was perfectly fine, have been kind of mocked for it. Bleacher Report put out earlier this month that is, in quotes, one of their worst contracts given out this offseason for NFL teams. And for me, I'm just trying to figure out where we get to that kind of assumption. Chase Young, statistically, you're going to see the sack number, and you're going to go, 5.5, like, whatever. Like, that's not that good. And I understand that. Problem with Chase Young is he actually hit a lot of career benchmarks and career highs and just didn't get the final product that you want, which is obviously getting the sack. He had 34 pressures, the most of his career. The previous high was 25, so that's a pretty big jump in my opinion. And he had 21 QB hits, the biggest mark of his career. So career high in QB hits, career high in pressures, 5.5 sacks. To me, that math is where it gets frustrating for Chase Young. The lack of finishing is where it gets frustrating. But Chase Young was a different player the second half of the year as opposed to the first half of the year. And if the Saints can get a guy who is more, closely resembling that second half of the season, then first off, that $51 million for 3 years you gave, who gives a shit? I think that's a pretty good number for a guy like Chase Young if he's consistent. But I feel like the Saints might have a pass rush. And that's why out of all the 3 guys, he's the one that's going to be the most impactful if it hits. Because Look, I believe Kool-Aid McKinstry can make a difference for the secondary, but he's not going to be the backbone of it. I believe Justin Reed will. I would like to see Jawan Johnson be consistent, but he's not going to be the main target in the passing game. Chris Olave will. Chase Young, if he's not the top pass rusher, who are the Saints going to lean to? You can tell me Brian Brzee, and I believe you, and I get it. But, man, I think Chase Young needs to be that guy. And as for moving into a 3-4 scheme, this is what Chase Young had to say. I feel like an edge player is an edge player. At the end of the day, you're playing on the edge. Most of the time, it's the same roles. I mean, you can argue last year our 4-3 when we went to a different package, and I went to a 4-eye alignment. That's basically a 3-4, so it's kind of the same thing. So don't want to hear excuses about a different scheme. He's not going to use that excuse. I believe a second year with the Saints, you feel a little bit more comfortable, at least just situationally speaking. Doesn't have to go through an offseason of rehabbing from a neck injury, which I think is the biggest kind of takeaway for Chase Young. And the talent's always been there with him. So again, career high 34 pressures, career high 21 QB hits. How about Chase Young turns those into 9 or 10 sacks this upcoming season? And if he does that, that's going to bode well for the Saints defense, which I believe is the weakness right now of this team, not the offense, which sounds kind of crazy given the fact that we don't know who's going to start at quarterback. But that's just my confidence in Kellen Moore and some of the pieces that they have, particularly on the offensive line. So to round it out, the 3 players I believe that need to step up for the Saints this year, Kool-Aid McKinstry, second-year cornerback. I believe he's going to have to help out that secondary and be a difference maker. Jawan Johnson, I'm not saying give them 700 yards. I don't think he's that type of guy. But can you be consistent with your production? A lot of production at the back half and end of the year, not a lot in the front. Got to be better in that regard. And then Chase Young, I think he's going to be the guy for the defensive line. But you can't just say, I have 34 quarterback pressures and 5.5 sacks. Not going to be enough for me. You got to be a little bit more, consistent to finishing off the play. So there are plenty of more to get to. I saw Pelicans Nola in the chat mentioning Pete Werner. Pete Warner's one of those guys that I actually thought about putting on this list. He just missed my top 3. I actually had him at 4, and he absolutely falls in that category. Pete's the type of guy where DeMario's getting a little older. Can Pete Werner take that next step? And I know he can be a good player because we've seen him as a good player, but he also kind of falls in that Jawan class, right? Saints paid you. Step the hell up. They're going to need you to do it, especially with DeMario getting older. So, those were the 3. There's other that could have been mentioned, but that's what I'm going to go with for now. Let's just switch over to 3 players that the Saints should sign before camp. And as always, guys, if you are listening and you guys do enjoy having our usual Saints chats, make sure to put in the comment section below any of your thoughts, questions, predictions, declarations, whatever it may be, and I'll pull it up in just give me about 4 minutes and we'll get to it. But let's start off 3 players the Saints should sign before training camp. Now, there are a bunch that I thought of. There were a couple that just stood out to me. I'm going to go with one that is not that exciting, but I can make a case for why they should do it. And also, again, like I said, don't put high expectations. I just think this would be a depth piece. Gerald Everett, veteran tight end, has worked in Kellen Moore's offense. Now, he's coming off an abysmal year. I get that. Production-wise, not good. But look, Chicago was never the right fit for him. I would argue for Chicago, they actually had like an overabundance of weapons last year in an offense that just wasn't really working. And I think for Gerald Everett, going to the Saints where there's not a lot of pass catching options right now, I think that could go, pretty well for him. Look at the Saints depth chart right now at tight end. Obviously, Jawan Johnson's the guy. And then really behind him, it's Taysom Hill, who injured, Foster Moreau, who injured, and then Jack Stoll, who has done really well so far for the Saints. They love the way he's kind of progressed, and they believe he'll be a good blocking tight end for them. That's why they signed him. But that's not a pass-catching tight end. So if they're looking for another pass catcher at that position, I would argue Gerald Everett, there's a connection there with Kellen Moore's offense. He is not going to cost you a freaking dime. And I think this is one of those moves where there is no risk. Is the reward high? Not really, but the Saints need depth at position. So I'm going to put Gerald Everett in there at number 3. Number 2, I'm going to go with Keenan Allen. I think this one's kind of a no-brainer. This is one that's kind of a, all right, basic bitch kind of answer from myself. And yes, I just call myself a basic bitch with that answer. But Keenan Allen is a big-bodied wide receiver who the Saints are going to use, in my opinion, if they were to sign him, pretty well. I understand the Saints are valuing speed. That's why they love bringing in a guy like Brandon Cooks. That's why they love Shaheed and his outlook for this year. That's why they're not going to trade Olave. They value speed. I value speed. I'm excited to see how the Saints wide receiver core plays this year. But man, I do think you need a little bit more muscle. You need a little bit more height to this offense. And I think Keenan Allen, albeit towards the late stages of his career, can give the Saints a little bit of that. And look, I'm not expecting him to turn back the clock and all of a sudden being a 1,000-yard guy. I think those days are over personally. 2 out of the last 3 years. Now there's reasons for it, but 2 out of the last 3 years, he's gone under 800 yards receiving. So, to think that he's going to go back to, what was it a couple years ago? 1,200 yards with the Chargers? Not happening. But can Keenan Allen, even at age 33, be a technician for the Saints, kind of be a smooth operator? I do. I really do. So, I like the idea of adding him to this offense. I could use the same explanation for Gerald Everett about knowing the offensive scheme, but for Keenan Allen, for a guy who's still productive, I think you go past that and you just go from the basicness of he can make the Saints better. He's still a productive player. If the money is right, I say you sign him because it's not going to jeopardize your future. You have the cap space for right now, and he is going to give you variety. I think the Saints need that with this offense. One thing about Olave and Shaheed, and I will sing their praises from now until the start of the season. I really do believe they're both going to play really well. And I've been kind of saying multiple times that if Olave's healthy, I believe he's going to have the best season of his career, and I feel strongly about that. But you need someone to take some of those hits over the middle. You need someone to take the pressure off of Olave. I think you need to add a veteran presence to that room. And I know they brought in Donovan Peoples-Jones, but that to me isn't the splash signing. I know they visit with Gabe Davis, but nothing's happened yet. And I'd be fine with them signing Gabe Davis. He fits that idea of adding a big-bodied wide receiver. I just think Keenan can make a couple more plays. And, I mentioned helping out the wide receivers. Signing Keenan Allen is going to help out your rookie quarterback, if that's who's starting, or help out your second-year quarterback, if that's who's starting. So I like the idea of signing Keenan Allen. Again, I know it is kind of your basic answer. You're going to hear it from every Saints podcaster, every Saints writer, every Saints analyst. They'll mention Keenan Allen, but there's a reason to it. They lack playmakers. He is still a playmaker, and he does something their current playmakers don't do all that much of. So I like the idea of adding Keenan Allen. Now, the final one, also going to be no-brainer, but I just believe this one, if the medicals check out, it's a done deal. Again, if the medicals check out, I believe it'll be a done deal. Asante Samuel Jr. The idea of Asante Samuel Jr. playing for the Saints feels weird because when I think of Asante Samuel, I think of his father, Eagles. I think of, Falcons. I think of Patriots. Like, those are those teams I think of. And a lot of those teams are ones that you don't think of well with the Saints. I don't think of any of those three well with the Saints. But Asante Samuel Jr., again, not a superstar, but he would give you an outside corner. And I am big on the Saints finding a way to make one of their position groups a strength on defense. I talked about it earlier. The reason I believe the Saints offense is going to be better than the Saints defense is deep down in my gut, I genuinely feel like the Saints offensive line is going to move people. It is going to be a problem. And when you're really good in the offensive line, everything can kind of trickle down off that. But when I look at the Saints defense, I don't know what the fuck the specialty is going to be because I don't know what they're going to get out of their defensive line. I don't know what the linebacking core is going to look like because DeMario's a year older, and you guys mentioned it before. Pete Werner, who knows? I mean, the arrow's kind of been trending downward the last 2 seasons with him. He's got to get it back to going forward. And the secondary, I love that they added Justin Reed. I love that they drafted Jonas Sanker, although we're still waiting to see him in action. I still think Tyrann Mathieu can be a playmaker, albeit it's limited quantity, compared to what it was before. But if you were to add Asante Samuel Jr., there is less pressure depending on a guy like Kool-Aid McKinstry. But let's say you do sign Asante Samuel Jr. and Kool-Aid McKinstry, as I mentioned in the first segment, is a guy who does step up and take that leap in year 2. Now, I genuinely could say, okay, it might not be super. It might not be the greatest thing you'll see, but the Saints would have a calling card on defense. It would be the secondary because you would have Asante Samuel Jr., you would have Kool-Aid McKinstry on a year 2 leap, you would have Alontae Taylor, who is versatile, can move all over the field. You'd have Justin Reed. You would have Tyrann Mathieu still, and hopefully younger guys, Quincy Riley from Louisville, Jonas Sanker from Virginia, players you drafted this year that you believe can give you some versatility, can also make a difference. And throw in Isaac Yedem, who you signed to kind of give you that, little bit of depth, a little bit of veteran presence, obviously knows what the Saints are all about being here before. So they don't have a calling card on defense. I believe if they feel good about Asante Samuel's neck injury, and that is supposed to happen in July where you get an update on his health, at least that's what kind of been the rumblings. We'll get another checkup in July, and if all's good, someone will sign him. The Saints have met with him. The Saints know what he's about. Brandon Staley knows what he's about. So I think that's the one to me. If I could pick one, I probably would go with that because it'd give you a calling card defensively. Lord knows the Saints need it. And I just want to say this about all these three before I get into any possible comments you guys have. I think we'll probably keep it a little shorter here today than usual. I just don't think the Saints are going to be in a position to make a move where it's going to cripple next year's, salary cap situation, which I think is the benefit. When the Saints don't get active in free agency in the beginning, I know a lot of people get a little bit upset about that. And, to a certain extent, so do I. Like, you kind of feel like the Squidward meme of you seeing people having fun outside and the Saints are doing nothing. But you get to this stage now in the offseason where the Saints do have some spending cash. The Saints do have flexibility. And if they were to sign Keenan Allen and Asante Samuel Jr., let's just say they would, they have the cash space to do it. But I don't think you're signing either of these guys to a multi-year deal, which means you're pretty much getting one-year mercenaries to kind of help your team now in an essence, because they know what Kellen Moore's about, kind of help him establish his culture, which I think is an added benefit. And they're both really good playmakers too. So you would get better from a depth perspective. You get better from a veteran perspective in terms of leadership. You have guys that you don't have to worry about the will they, won't they kind of fit with Kellen Moore's vision. He knows what both players can bring to the table, both on and off the field. So I just think there's a lot of pros. I really can't think of any cons. The only con would be if either one gets a multi-year deal, and I don't think that's going to be the case because one's in their 30s and the other one has a bad neck injury. So that's kind of where I'm at with the three players the Saints should sign. There are a couple of others that were in my kind of vicinity of it. Thought about mentioning Gabe Davis. This would be the weird one, and I haven't seen a lot of people bring up, but I even thought about bringing up Von Miller because that is when I think of a 3-4 outside linebacker, Von Miller's the guy I think of. And he still had 6 sacks last year. Like, he's still a productive player. So if the Saints feel like, hey, we got to get an edge in here, a veteran guy, teach these guys a thing or two, I wouldn't be against it. So that was another player I considered, but those were the three that I settled on. So without further ado, like I said, guys, we're going to keep it kind of light, but we'll get into our fan Q&A presented by Sunshine, your hometown John Deere. Nothing runs like a deer. Going to go through any possible comments that you guys have here. Going to go through them. Pelicans Noah saying, what's going on, guys? Who dat? Let's go Saints. Jerry in the chat. What's going on, Jerry? Jerry says, now with Jair Alexander out of the picture because he signed with the Saints, who should the Saints target next? I think, kind of as I mentioned before the list, I think if Asante Samuel Jr.'s physical was okay, I kind of think that's a guy you take a swing on. Not going to cost much. Still is productive. Knows Brandon Staley's defense. So I would probably take a look there. Jair Alexander, to me, I don't know if the Saints were legitimately in that sphere of being able to sign him, being in the sweepstakes. Would have been fine with a deal, obviously, because he would help them at a position of need. I just don't know how realistic it would have been. But I would go with Asante Samuel Jr. That would probably be my take, Jerry, for that. Xavier says, is it wrong to be happy with how quiet it's been this offseason? Not necessarily. I'm actually kind of grasping with that myself, Xavier. Like, part of me loves, being in the machine of content creation and having something to talk about. But to a detriment sometimes, the Saints, it's negative news, right? And there really just hasn't been a lot of negatives. I mean, the stories have been practice, group paintball session, like wholesome shit. And I'll take that. So I don't think there's anything wrong with not wanting to have some controversial storylines. Pelicans Noah says, what's the old boy's name? Number 20 linebacker. I don't even remember his name because he's never on the field. Pete Werner, that's him. He needs to step up. I agree wholeheartedly with you. Pelicans Noah, as I mentioned before, I brought you up before. He was in that top 5 of players I think need to step up. Just missed my cut for the 3, but he's on there. I think he's got the luxury of, like Demario Davis has kind of been, and granted he's declining, he's kind of been like this immortal figure in the NFL where, like, it's getting better with age. It makes no sense. Now, obviously, you're starting to see the wheels fall off a little bit, which is just father time. He's undefeated. But there's every year where Pete Werner's got to get back to playing really good football. It's this year. The Saints can't afford for Pete Werner to struggle one bit. Like, he's got to play well. Michael says, I don't see Jawan improving at 30 years old. Very inconsistent his whole career. Yeah, I'm with you for that. I think the reason I'm putting him in there where I'm like, oh, maybe he can, is it is a different system. And I do think that kind of matters to me. Does that mean that he's going to? Absolutely not. But I do have some shred of hope that Jawan Johnson can take a little, not a huge leap, but can he give you 600 yards, which I don't think is a huge ask. I really don't. Like, you look at Jawan Johnson's numbers. Jawan Johnson over the last couple of years, 548 yards, 368 yards, 508 yards. I'm asking, can he give you 52 more yards than last season, but be consistent with it? And I don't think that's the biggest ask in the world. So we'll see if that ends up happening. Japanese Hercules bringing up Michael Thomas for players they should sign. Yeah, look, man, you guys know where I'm at with Michael Thomas. One of my favorite Saints players of the last 10 years, without a doubt. But he hasn't played since 2023. So, I don't think anyone's going to sign him at this point. I will be rooting hard for Michael Thomas if he is signed. But as of now, it's just it kind of seems like a nothing burger on that front. So the reason I'm not adding him in there is like, is he playing football again? I just don't know. The other three guys, they're playing football at some point in the next couple of months. So, but I get it. Saints fans are always going to love MT, and I respect that. Jaden says, hot take, Kellen Moore wins coach of the year for the Saints. I don't know if it is a hot take. I don't know if it's necessarily a bad one. The problem is, even if he exceeds expectations, it's tough to win coach of the year because he'd have to make the playoffs for him to win coach of the year, in my opinion. Because even if Kellen Moore goes 8-9, right? In the eyes of many, that is a fantastic season because they are considered to be the worst team in the NFC. They're favored to win one of their games this year, just one, with the second easiest schedule. They're favored to win one. And that one game is against the Jets. So it's not even against an NFC opponent. So, yeah, I mean, Kellen Moore goes like 8-9. It's a win for him. But the problem is, even if he does that, there'll be a coach out there that wins 12 or 13 games, and that'll probably be the one that ends up winning coach of the year. And the cycle kind of repeats itself. So I'd love to see it, Jaden. I think that is the definition of a hot take. But, I just kind of have my doubts. If the Saints make the playoffs, though, I believe he'll be the guy. And that would be quite the story for New Orleans. Tim says, who are your running backs to make the 53? Yeah, obviously the no-brainer is Alvin. I think that one's the easy one. I still think that we'll see Kendre Miller make the roster. I know that there's a lot of concerns, and I guess frustration would be the best word to use with the fact that he's never healthy. But he's by far away the second best guy on this team outside of Alvin at running back. Devin Neal, you drafted. I feel like he's a shoo-in. I think the fourth spot, it's what's interesting, right? You're looking at Clyde Edwards-Helaire. You're looking at Velus Jones. You're looking at Xavier Valade. So you're looking at guys like that. They just signed Cam Akers. So I think, honestly, I'd like to see Cam Akers be a decent player to even make the fourth. But what you're banking on, the best version of the Saints, and I don't feel confident saying this, but I think it's the truth. The best version of the Saints would be one where Kendre Miller's healthy this year. Will he be healthy? I don't know. But I think he is by far and away their second best option at running back. Obviously, Devin Neal, I think, makes the team because you drafted him, you're rookie. Kellen Moore likes what he saw, which is why they got him. But who knows? Maybe Cam Akers ends up being that fourth. So I'm going to go with Cam Akers. I know a lot of people haven't picked him. I'm going to go with Cam for now. That's going to be my guess. But he could also be just a camp body. We'll see what happens. Jaden says, one more hot take for you. Chris Olave has the best season ever. He'll be top 5 in receiving yards. Go for a little over 1,500, 120 receptions, and 15 touchdowns. God damn. I don't know if I would personally go that strong. It does classify as a hot take, Jaden. I do love the optimism and positivity. But receiving yards wise, I said it before, I'd love to see him at 1,300. And that'd be the best mark of his career. That'd be a really good season. Would get paid. And that'd be really good for the Saints. It means he kind of hit it off with his quarterback, whoever ends up winning the battle. So, I do believe he's going to have the best season of his career if he's healthy. And this isn't like some blind faith. It's like, just look at what he does in his career so far. Had 1,000 yards receiving his first year as a rookie. Over 1,100 yards his second year, despite not being on the same page with Derek Carr. And then concussions pretty much make him play half a year. So I think for Olave, the arrow, as long as he's healthy, points up. Pelicans Noah says the only starting quarterback that has won a playoff game in the NFC South is Baker Mayfield. So the Saints had to be shot to get in the playoffs. You kind of lost me on that last part. It might be me. I just might be reading that wrong. But you did mention the NFC South, and this has been a question that we've talked about before. The reason I don't subscribe to the whole the Saints are definitely going to be the worst team in the league this year. And not that matters, right? If you're not the worst team in the league, but you're the second worst team in the league, who cares? Your season still stunk. I don't love the NFC South still. I don't think the Falcons are ready for prime time. I don't think the Buccaneers are going to be great on offense again. So, okay, so there you go, Pelicans. Thank you for clarifying. Baker Mayfield's the only quarterback in the NFC South that has won a playoff game, so the Saints have a shot to get into the playoffs. Yeah, I agree with that. So it is part of why I still think they're going 6-11. I know that's not a great number, but I think when you put context into it, I think the Saints are going to finish the year better. And I think that will make us feel better about it. I think for the Saints, like I said, Falcons, I don't believe they're ready for prime time. Maybe I'm wrong. Repeating a third offensive coordinator now, it's hard to keep replacing these dudes. Eventually, there's a drop-off. I believe this is the year that it happens. And then the Panthers, I'll keep saying it till I'm blue in the face. We are banking on a decent finish to the year where they still lost the majority of their games to carry over into next year because Bryce Young finally looked like an NFL quarterback as opposed to looking like the worst quarterback in the league. So, yes, the bar was so low that they were able to raise it a little bit. But I still believe that bar is low, and I still believe the NFC South is the worst division in the conference. And to Pelicans' NOLA points, I'm not saying they got like a playoff shot that's a good one, but I will not subscribe to them definitely worst team in the league when the division. I can't right now on June 18th feel confident about who I'd send to go to the playoffs. I think if I had to, I'd go Tampa Bay at like 9-8, and I don't even feel good about that pick. I don't feel good about it one bit. So that's kind of where I'm at with the NFC South, and I think that's kind of where the Saints are in this kind of point of limbo at this moment. So we'll see. But I think for New Orleans, if you're kind of trying to spin this in the positive direction and feel a little bit better about the franchise, a lot of it's going to come down to those fringe players who I believe are the type of guys that can take those next steps. There's players like Kool-Aid McKinstry, Chase Young, Jawan, Pete Werner. I'm going to even throw him in there. Trevor Penning, if he plays as a serviceable guard. These are factors that can make the Saints better than people expect. Health-wise, I think this is something that continues to be just swept under the rug. The Saints were bad. The Saints were also completely obliterated by injuries. Olave barely played. Eric McCoy barely played. Obviously, we don't really talk about him anymore because he's not on the team. Derek Carr barely played. So the Saints, they go 0-7 in games without Derek Carr. Taysom Hill's knee got blown out. Rashid Shaheed, knee injury. Defensively, a nightmare in terms of their health. So, you traded away Lattimore. Debo got hurt. Just a lot happened for the Saints. Now, a lot of those guys aren't in the picture anymore. Carr's not in the picture. Lattimore's not in the picture. Debo's not in the picture. But Olave will be. And if he's healthy, they're a better team. And Eric McCoy is the glue to that O-line. So we'll see what happens. But I think as we get closer to training camp and as we get closer to week 1, I think there are a couple of building blocks on this Saints team, maybe a little bit better than I felt a couple of months ago. And I think it's about these guys who are talented enough to make a difference, finding that next step, that next gear to kick it into. And if they can do that, maybe we'll have some fun this fall. But for now, I'm going to keep the vibes high. I'm going to keep the optimism trending upward, and we'll go from there. So training camp, guys, the Saints announced, I believe it starts July 22nd. They are also going to go to California to have practices. See how that goes for the Saints and whether or not that ends up being a hit with the fans or kind of a dud. But we'll see what happens. Until then, though, guys, I'll have more coverage here on the Straight Up Saints podcast. So make sure to subscribe to Boot Crew Media. Make sure to follow me on Twitter at Rose Vogel Report. And as always, guys, stay tuned for more from the show, the Straight Up Saints podcast, the destination for the Who Dat Nation.